far as the grass coming back, it does seem that it's come back from seed. However, grass in the actual lagoon itself was seemingly extirpated. There was almost none to be found anywhere, even in the shallowest areas of Mosquito Lagoon. However, in even just some of the roadside ditches within the refuge, Ruppia maritima, widgeon grass, was growing. And because of its wide range of salinity tolerance and the fact that ducks and other birds have an affinity for eating it, it seems that they help transport some of the seed back into the lagoon. And there always was some small amount of seed in the lagoon, but the way it came back, it's very difficult to quantify exactly whether the seeds were dormant, because it seemed to come back all at once, for the most part, starting in the growing season last year. We were not expecting that. The fishermen, the scientists, I don't think anybody was expecting to see such a wide recovery of grass, and it didn't fully cover the historic levels of flats, the full coverage that we would see when you're looking back at pre-2010 satellite imagery last year. It seemed to make a good bit of progress, but there was a limit to it. However, this year, I would say there's near historic seagrass coverage in Mosquito Lagoon and in portions of the North Indian River Lagoon. The east side of the Indian River Lagoon does also have a lot of grass coverage, and as Laura Lee pointed out, I think it has a lot to do with the depth of the water. It's shallow enough that the grass has been able to get enough light to grow, and it just seems to colonize those areas better, and more quickly. But it's hard to say, exactly what the trigger for that was. My personal opinion is that the system was able to stabilize in a chemistry type way, that allowed it to put into favor the water quality conditions that seagrass needs to grow. Oftentimes, it takes a long time for those kind of processes to take place, and they're hard to measure and quantify. It can be things that we may not even particularly understand, down to a bacterial or biological level, on a very small scale. For example, in a reef aquarium that runs as a marine ecosystem contained within itself, if something happens and the tank crashes and you have a die off of the coral or whatever else you're growing in the tank, even if you're testing the nitrogen and the phosphorus and everything with test kits and the levels come back as to where they should be, it takes some time before all of a sudden the tank will begin to grow again and look normal. And it seems that the lagoon has done something similar, but on a much larger scale and on a much longer time scale, over a period of 12 years now since the initial algal blooms occurred. But anyway, it's been quite astounding to see, and it's interesting that it seems to be happening in reverse order, of what the initial algal blooms started. It seems that the algal blooms started at their worst in Banana River, and then were particularly bad going through the Indian River Lagoon, and finally in Mosquito Lagoon. And now it's gone exactly backwards of that. Mosquito Lagoon started to come back first. The Indian River Lagoon north end has started to recover a little bit better as well. And the Banana River Lagoon in the north end of it, which ironically is labeled as one of the more impaired areas, seems to be the first to start to show any positive signs. So the no motor zone, which we're seeing here on the screen, north of the port there, has pretty impressive seagrass growth, from what people can see, and that's on the west side of the no motor zone. Now, there's no development per se on the west side of the no motor zone, so I'm sure that helps greatly that the grass is coming back over there, and I'm sure it's coming back on the east side of the no motor zone as well. However, no one can go over there and verify, because the east side of the no motor zone has been closed to the public since the early 2000s. I've also been told by Dr. Eric Reimer, who's one of the scientists responsible for the monitoring of the ecological programs at Kennedy Space Center, which is, unfortunately, it's not Kennedy Space Center trying to be proactive and watch things. It's them doing what they're required to do. They have to monitor these things for their environmental reviews that they probably were signed on 2 years ago through some of those NEPA documents if we went and looked. But anyway, according to Eric, the very northernmost portion of the Banana River, which is up near the launch pads north of the NASA Causeway, is also growing seagrass, which is impressive to see. So yes, that area there going north of there, which is of course completely off limit to the public. So we just have to take Eric's word that it's growing back. He hasn't shared any images with me, but nonetheless, there seems to be positive signs. in many portions of the lagoon.
I'm very encouraged to hear the Banana River is coming back.
Mhm.
You know, it's a big question mark for us because they won't let anyone up there to test, and they won't release whatever testing they have. So it's just a big question mark for the general public as to what is the real condition up there. How is it down around in Banana River Lagoon down around the port?
I personally have not been in that area, but I can find out, and I'll get some information from some people who have been there recently in the past week or two, other fishing guides that I'm friends with. From what I've been told, uh, it looks pretty good, and there is some grass, but it wasn't quite as clear as the no motor zone last I checked. Um, but again, the Banana River has always been very flashy with these algal blooms, even going back to 2014, 2015, 2016. There was periods where the Banana River had incredible clarity, but it didn't seem to grow seagrass. And the same thing
Mhm.
happened in the Indian River Lagoon. We'd have these periods
Mhm.
of clear water up to 6, 8 feet deep in some areas, in the Peacock's Pocket area and south of the Nassau Causeway, but that didn't translate to seagrass growth, which is ironic if we're saying it's from a seed bank, because you would think the birds that would be carrying those seeds from the refuge, maybe the areas around Black Point and some of the ditches and other things that are just the roadside swales where the Rupia maritima grass was growing, even when it seemed to be extirpated from the open lagoon. You would think the birds would carry it to these areas evenly. So there seemed to be something water chemistry related that was preventing the seagrass from growing, despite the clarity. Mosquito Lagoon, even though it's now the area that has the most seagrass growth, never displayed those periods of clarity that the Indian River and Banana River did. It remained uh, quite turbid through the entire algal bloom cycle, even in winter, especially the south end of Mosquito Lagoon, just never cleared up. And even this past winter, there was an algal bloom that started last year in the fall that lasted through winter in the south end of Mosquito Lagoon, and we were unsure if it was going to clear again and if the grass was going to begin to colonize, and it didn't all the way through May. However, going into summer, the most seemingly unlikely time for an algal bloom to clear, it did clear up pretty well, and the south end of the lagoon looks pretty good, although not quite as clear as north of Hall River Canal. So it's just really hard to put our finger on what exactly drives these cycles, um, and results in the grass growth and the water clarity, where they, cross over and one supports the other. It's pretty bizarre, but all in all, I would say that the lagoon appears to be moving in the right direction, and hopefully it continues to do so.
Billy, Peter Hink does a seagrass report. He lives down around Sebastian Inlet and lives on the Sebastian River. And his latest report says there's a lot of seagrass, mostly of one species, but it all seems to be covered with algae. So my question is, are you seeing mostly one species of seagrass in Mosquito Lagoon, or are there several species? And the second part of my question, are you seeing fish fry and it being used as a nursery again?
Absolutely.
Yes. So, as far as the first part of the question, I mainly see two species of seagrass. I see widgeon grass, the Ripia maritima, seems to be 99% the dominant species in most areas. Not only can you tell by the way that the blades of the grass look, but there's also very distinctive inflorescences, which are the flowers and seeds from the widgeon grass that grow out in long strands that come up to the surface of the water. Manatee grass and shoal grass and other types of grass don't produce those types of inflorescences, so it's pretty obvious what you're looking at, when you see it, and it does seem to be primarily widgeon grass. There is also some star grass, which is a smaller type of grass, and anywhere that there's a little bit of broken bottom, where there's not dense coverage from the widgeon grass, there is star grass on the bottom as well. As far as the marine organisms utilizing it, yes. I got down on the front of my boat on a light wind day and just basically laid on the deck and drifted across the flat looking up in the north end of Mosquito Lagoon. I did this, and I also did it down around Widgeon Bay. And I saw around 11 or 12 different species of fish, mainly forage fish such as pigfish, pinfish, uh, also sheep's head minnows and other types of killifish, and of course smaller other unidentified fish, which were likely fry for any and all of those species, and also potentially redfish, sea trout, black drum, snook, etc. Um, you noted that down around Sebastian that there seems to be algae growing on the seagrass. I actually did a post on the Lagoon Waterman Alliance page that I took some video from one of those days where I was down in the deck kind of looking at everything. And around the Widgeon Bay area, which is just across from Holliver Canal on the east side of Mosquito Lagoon, there was a large amount of small benthic organisms that are like snails and hermit crabs, and they were literally covering the seagrass, not in a harmful way, but in a meaningful way, because these small hermit crabs and these small snails actually are algivores. They eat algae, and they actually keep the blades of the seagrass clean of epiphytic algae like hair algae and such. So it was very nice to, and I have not seen these organisms in close to a decade. So it was nice to see them coming back with such gusto.
We did some seining with the Girls and Boys Club at Beacon 42. There's like a little ribbon of grass that's growing north of the boat ramps all along that shoreline. And it was astonishing how much life we got just in those few short seine net drags. Tons of pipefish and the hermit crabs. They're in little teeny tiny shells that are like a quarter of an inch. They were everywhere, and we got multiple species of fish and sort of shrimp and crabs. It was astonishing, how much life was in that little strip of seagrass there. So multiply that out throughout the whole lagoon, and it's amazing. It's
Yeah,
wonderful.
those little shells are, I believe those are cirrus, a type of cirrus snails. Um, and they're obviously very important for the health of the seagrass and helping keep it clean. The hermit crabs are also important for that. They eat algae, but the hermit crabs also will, of course, are opportunistic. They're omnivorous, so they'll also eat any kind of detritus and waste that gets down in there. But yes, it's very promising to see the beginnings of the entire ecosystem recovering, and it's such a fast rate. But there is a lot of latency, especially with the fishery stuff. So we've tried to stay on it with FWC to make sure that they're managing the fishery properly as we see this recovery, and that they're not, for example, with redfish, opening up harvest prematurely.
Mhm.
And we're also trying to lobby them a little bit to see if they won't perhaps manage the National Wildlife Refuge for abundance rather than for harvest, and have it act as an area of proliferation for all the other lagoon species to help really reestablish and make the entire lagoon, even for people that want to harvest fish, better and healthier. We've seen that in other parts of the world, Galapagos Islands, Costa Rica. They have large exclusion zones for commercial fishing, and as a result, the artisanal fishermen that fish locally there are catching way more fish. And ironically, the commercial industrial level fishing that happens on the perimeters of these areas is also more successful. So everybody wins when you give these ecosystems a little bit of a break and manage them properly. But the lagoon's showing us that it's trying to come back, and it's so promising to see. We just didn't know if we were ever going to see it again in our lifetime. It was very, doom and gloom for so many years there. So it's nice to see it showing positive signs in so many ways.
The clarity this summer has been really astonishing, and we never lost it. This is the first time that I don't know how long it's been since we didn't have the whole system cloud up with algae blooms during the summertime. The water, even by Titusville, the river it's been clear all summer long. I noticed, Billy, I was wondering, after Hurricane Debbie, we had a solid week of strong southwest winds, and it blew a lot of the grassolaria, the drift algae that, that's just out there floating around, blew it up against the eastern shore of the Indian River. I don't know if it did it in the Mosquito Lagoon or not. I couldn't get out there in a boat, but I know in the Indian River, it blew mountains of grassolaria up against anywhere there was a beach that was loaded with grassolaria. And after a couple of days, we noticed that a bunch of stone crabs, had crawled up out of the grassolaria and crawled up on top of it. And then they all baked in the sun. They all died. I'm talking thousands and thousands and thousands of baby stone crabs. Did you see anything like that in the Mosquito Lagoon? And I'm wondering if, we've never had a strong stone crab fishery in the Indian River Lagoon. Do you think that maybe the prevalence of grassolaria as a hiding place for them when they're juveniles may have caused an increase in stone crabs?
Possibly, and we did see similar drift algae issues, especially earlier this year in Mosquito Lagoon. Towards the end of winter, there seemed to be a large influx of grassolaria, and there's another species of drift algae which is almost a bright red color. The grassolaria is kind of a brown rust red color.
Yeah.
There's another type of drift algae called Spiridia filamentosa that's like bright red, and we saw a lot of that. But more so grassolaria, and it did form large mats up on some of the flats on the east side of the lagoon. We were concerned that it was going to, kill the grass underneath it and whatnot, and it definitely did in some areas. But the grass growth has been so robust that as soon as that drift algae seemed to break down and start to decay, that the grass literally came back right where all those areas were that had large piles of the drift algae build up. And subsequently, I have not noticed large amounts of drift algae currently in Mosquito Lagoon, but yeah, there's no doubt that even the drift algae, which of course is normally in the deeper basins of the lagoon,
Right.
Certainly provides a habitat for a whole nother entourage of species that live in those deeper areas, probably including stone crabs and other small animals, copepods, and everything in between. So, but we have to keep an eye on drift algae because it is a sign of more nutrients perhaps than there should be in the system. It just grows so much faster, and we did get large blooms of drift algae all through the algal bloom years. There'd be periodic blooms where it would boom and bust, and then when it would die, it would of course release all the nutrients again. But it seems that the seagrass now has taken its lion's share of the available nutrients in the water that the grassolaria and other drift algae would normally use, which is what the system is supposed to be, is seagrass based, not algae based, whether we're talking macroalgae like drift algae or microalgae like algal blooms. So it's good to see the seagrass doing what it's supposed to, but it's I think that even some of the smaller crabs and stuff that we may have seen in some of those instances may be able to utilize the seagrass the same way. And perhaps the reason we don't know that they're there is because the seagrass doesn't end up moving around and putting them in a position where they have to crawl out like you saw them and try to adjust themselves to find cover. Because when that drift algae builds up like that, it does create nasty areas where it starts to break down and the water gets gross and can look putrid. And it can produce smells and other things like that, and that's certainly not helpful for the lagoon. And until it breaks down and the wave action is able to distribute that stagnant water, it is harmful for any life that might be in those areas where the drift algae builds up like that. So it's nice to see the lagoon moving away from the drift algae, at least at the levels that it was, and we'll have to see what happens going forward.
What all this says to me is it marks the critical importance of runoff. We are in not a serious, but a drought. We're some 11 inches below our average, which means we're not getting the runoff. If we can get through this month without some big crashing rain events, we can look forward to some really nice months ahead till next rainy season starts. I'm getting the same kind of reports of fish in clarity here east of the South Tropical Trail, not so much in the Banana, but in the Indian, and but no seagrass, but a considerable amount of that drift algae you speak of. So to me, it says salinity is very important, and it's runoff that's the problem with salinity, and we need to keep up our battle to slow down that runoff volume that we face so much. But it looks good for the next several months anyway.
There's no doubt that there's a correlation between heavy rain periods and a decline in the condition of the lagoon. And it was especially exacerbated a few years ago when we were in the peak of the algal bloom timeframes. We'd have, like you said, nice winters, nice dry seasons. Things would look okay, and then as soon as the rainy season would start, we'd immediately see a rapid decline. But it's been interesting to see that even with some of the rain we got last year, it didn't necessarily set back the portions of the lagoon that I frequent. But yes, anytime we're not mainlining fresh water and everything that it brings with it into the lagoon, it's certainly a positive thing for the healthy estuary.
Laura Lee, you mentioned that MRC did water quality testing for all those years. We do have that on file. We haven't had the staff to really do a review of it to see what, my question is, when the lagoon was great, what was the salinity in by area?
Yeah.
So we have a plan to go after that and study that data and those data and see where it was. I was privileged to live on the lagoon during Apollo in base housing, and the seagrass was everywhere. And we were seeing ocean level animals, sea anemones, seahorses. So I'm sure it was in the 25, if not a higher range. And I think that's where we need to look for. So we're going to do that study in the near future and see what we've got.